Do you want to start with the opening words, or?
Sure, let's start with the opening words and virtual chalice lighting. How about that?
Hey, yeah, we're just going to do a very quick, short chalice lighting. I have a chalice here, and I always encourage you to really light a real chalice if you can, particularly if you're gathered in a group.
Okay, sorry. I was into the wrong meeting.
Oh, someone else has joined us.
Sorry, Clemson, South Carolina.
I'm glad you're here. So we light this chalice for the light of truth. We light this chalice for the warmth of love. We light this chalice for the energy of action. We light this chalice for the gift of leadership. So welcome, leaders, to our webinar.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us. I'm very excited to be doing this webinar. Pat and I together, we're both very excited about this. I think it's an opportune time. We planned this webinar series so that it would be toward the end of the church year, when most of you, I hope, are done with your annual budget drives and can have a little bit of time to look back and reflect and think about what you might do for the upcoming drive. If I can suggest that people who are not talking, if you can keep muted, I think that would be better. We won't hear echoes. All right, so let's do a quick introductions and check in. I'll tell you a little bit about myself for those of you who don't know me. I'm Barry Finkelstein. I'm one of the 4 consultants with Stewardship for Us. We do all sorts of stewardship consulting for congregations and for district and regional and UUA gatherings. We do capital campaigns and annual budget drives and strategic planning and so on. I've been doing this work for almost 10 years now and have worked with somewhere close to 50 congregations. I love doing it. I'm also generally a management consultant, get to work with my son, which is a great treat. And we do work with a lot of nonprofits and some other varied organizations, mostly in New York and Washington. But my real passion is doing UU stewardship consulting. And I'm also the husband of a UU minister, Reverend Roberta Finkelstein, and we are currently in Wilmington, Delaware, where she is the developmental minister at the moment. So Pat, why don't you introduce yourself for those of you who might not know you, which are probably few.
Oh, well, you know, it's a big world.
Yes.
So I am Patricia, or Pat Infanti. I am part of the Central East Regional Staff. So in that capacity, I serve as a primary contact for congregations in the Philadelphia area, in the Central and South New Jersey area, and Manhattan. Kind of an eclectic mix. I live in New Jersey, just outside of Philadelphia. So it makes sense, actually, who the congregations that I'm working most closely with. We also have program management areas, so areas where we have a little extra special expertise. And I am a credentialed religious educator, so one of my program management areas is faith development, and one of my other ones is stewardship in the congregation. So this is something that I have a lot of energy for, and a lot of love for this. I'm a co-author of a curriculum for Tapestry of Faith about money, spirit, and money and spirit, a curriculum called Wisdom Path, if you've ever done it. So we'll hear more about that next time. So how did you want to do this, Barry?
Well, what I was thinking is, why don't you, since you have the roster of everyone who signed up, why don't you call on people and invite them to just introduce what congregation they're with, how many people they have, and maybe if they have a question that they want to make sure that we cover, they can ask it.
Okay.
How about that? And keep it to 10 or 15 seconds each, or we'll take forever doing just
Sure. And you know, I'm going to suggest that during this time, we stop share so that the speakers will show up we can see all of the faces. Great.
Fair enough.
All right. So I'm gonna just do the Brady Bunch thing, and I'm gonna start in the upper left. Arlington, who do you have there, and do you have a question for us?
Hi, we have 4 people here, I'm Sarah Masters, Bruce Ryder, Diane, Julius.
Kathleen Lyons.
And I think maybe a question, it doesn't need an answer right now, but I want to stick a pin in it, is that we're a relatively large congregation. And so as we're going along, we're going to be listening to things that maybe we can adapt, because some things don't work the same way for us as they do for others.
Great. Great. All right. David.
I don't know if you can hear me.
We have more than one David. So we will do, go ahead, David. David with no last name.
Hi, this is David Smith from Ventura, California congregation.
Huh.
We have 220 members.
Great. And do you have any burning questions that you're hoping that will be answered over the next 3 weeks?
No, I don't have a specific question.
Okay. All right, good. All right. David, top row, David.
Hi, I'm David Doubledam. I'm a member of Restoration in Philadelphia. I guess we're around 80 members. I don't have a particular question either. I'm actually a ministerial candidate, so I'm taking this for credit.
Oh,
So
okay.
I can put it on my competencies.
Excellent.
Great. Linda. And you may be muted, Linda. Let me unmute you.
Okay, can
There
you
you
hear me
go.
now? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Hi, I'm Linda J. With the Unitarian Society in East Brunswick, New Jersey. There are 5 of us here, and out of the 5, there's 4 board members and 3 members of our finance committee, including our treasurer. Many of us wear many hats here in this congregation. We're a congregation of 132 members. I don't know if there's a particular questions we have. I would say that one of the challenges we're finding is as our congregation is changing, the founding congregants are aging and moving away. They're also were the ones that tended to pledge at the largest, at a higher level, and so we're having new people come in that are pledging at a lower level, and the challenges of really not having enough money to do what we need to do.
Okay. I'm sorry, I am working with somebody who is emailing with a problem. So let's go with Deb. Deb Lehman. And you are also muted. You're unmuted now.
I unmuted, I think. We're from Meadville, Pennsylvania. We have 101 members, some recent increase in numbers. We don't have any really specific questions. We have a part-time interim minister right now.
Okay.
There's 3 folks here, they're board members.
Wonderful. Robert.
Guess I'm the only Robert.
I think you're the only Robert.
I'm Robert Hurt. I'm with the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Shenandoah Valley, just south of Winchester, top of Virginia, as we say. I'm just transitioning off the board, and I'll be back on stewardship starting in July. We have 146 members, and we just had a real successful pledge campaign.
Super. Wonderful.
And I don't have any questions, just soaking in stuff.
Okay. Well, the chat box is a good place for questions that come as we go, because I think as we get into the content, maybe there'll be more questions that come into your head. Okay. Bill Kramer.
Good. That was well done. Bill Cranmer with Frederick UU. We have about 252 members, and I don't have any specific questions at this time.
Okay. Well, good. Welcome.
Thank you.
Jeffrey.
Hi, my name is Jeff. I'm a board member from San Luis Obispo Fellowship. We're about 220 members. And in terms of a question, you know, kind of typical thing, budgets go up each year. How do we get them there? And, you know, it's becoming more and more of a challenge as they continue to grow up and our church grows as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Tracy. I'm unmuting you, Tracy. Whoops.
Thanks.
You're good.
I'm Tracy Sopp. I'm from the Unitarian Universalist Church in Reston. We have about 180 members. My question is, I know how we've done it before. I know the same old, same old. I've been there about 10 years. How do we make it new, fresh, something that people are even remotely interested in? So that's my question.
Great. Holly, I've unmuted you, or you may need to, no, you're on, okay, you're good.
Hi, I'm Holly Hendrickson and Jim Olson. I'm going off the board. He's coming on the board as the new treasurer. We're from Indianapolis, the UU Church of Indianapolis, and we're about 200 pledging members and friends.
Good. Charles Nelson.
Hi, Charlie Nelson here. Here with my wife. Sorry about my heartbeat. UU Church of Akron, and we'll see Barry in a couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah.
My question is, how do we encourage the laggards who always pledge but wait until the bitter end?
Okay. We all have a couple of those.
Mm-hmm.
How about York, our friends at York? York, if you are not able to, you're logged in as Winnie now. Okay, so we're gonna actually go down to Winnie. Can we hear you now? Let's try that. York.
Can you hear us now?
Yes. Hi, George.
Yes. Technology is overcome. Hey, everybody. We have 4 of us here in the room this evening, representatives of the board and the finance committee.
And stewardship.
Yay.
And we don't have any questions yet.
No questions yet. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Susan. Susan, you're unmuted. We can't hear you. We can't hear you, Susan, so if you would just do a quick introduction in the chat box, that would be wonderful, and we'll see if we can't figure out what the technical glitch is there. So I'm going to move on to Kelly.
Hi there. I'm Kelly Hausman. I'm with the UU Fellowship of Northern Westchester, and we're located in Mount Kisco, New York, in Westchester County. We have, I think we certified at 110 members this year. My question is similar to Tracy, well, a couple of questions. Similar to Tracy, I've been doing stewardship for about 7 or 8 years now with a very, very small team. So it is challenging to keep it new and keep it fresh. When you've got the same face every year, that's not always healthy. And beyond that, I guess because we have such a small team, we tend to start our planning fairly late in the year, sort of just before the pledge campaign starts. And we definitely don't have a 12-month year-round stewardship plan that we implement. I'd like to think about how I can, make more preparations. And the other thing is, when we have had generosity in a pledge campaign where we recognize that people have really dug deep, but we know that there's maybe a little capital campaign coming around the corner. How do you transition from generosity in your annual pledge and then go into a capital campaign? How do you keep that momentum when people might be feeling tapped out?
Okay.
I'm not hearing anything.
Meg, are you there? Yeah. All right. Let's do Meg.
Sorry, my name is Meg Harrelson. I'm here with Rich Sider and Pete Crone from the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Fairfax, Virginia. And no specific questions at this time.
Okay, good. That was me, not you. I was saying your name and I was muted, so that was why there was a little lag there.
All right.
Okay, Audrey. There's another question, Barry, in the chat box.
No, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Audrey.
My name's Audrey Misaladon. I'm from the First Unitarian Church in Pittsburgh. We have about 310 members. I'm the president of the board. I don't have any questions, specific questions, but we have been struggling the last few years. So I guess new ideas are what we need. Thank you.
Good. Rich. Rich, are you?
Okay,
Hey, you're unmuted. You're good.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. I'm Rich Fritzen. I'm from the Mainline Unitarian Church in Devon, Pennsylvania. We have about 540 members. I'm the go-to guy that they ask to talk about money, but this year has been the first time I've actually run the campaign because I'm now staff. I'm the executive director. I didn't bring anybody with me today because I only learned about this yesterday and didn't have time to put it together.
Okay.
The one question I have is, why do I do this? I just don't know. But this will be the first year we have a stable team that did the campaign last year and is going to stay together for the next 12 months. So we have a chance to plan what cultural messages we want to get out before we do something new next year.
Excellent.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Terry?
Unmuted?
You're unmuted now.
Okay.
Yay.
Terry Bailiff. I'm the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Clemson, South Carolina, and I have stewardship members and our board president. We're a small, mid-sized congregation, and our question is that we know stewardship is our primary fundraiser every year, but we've got some folks who want to do a lot of other kinds of fundraising, and how do we balance that so we don't tap people out?
That is a great question.
Me too.
Okay. All right, we're getting down there. Clint.
Is my sound okay?
Your sound is good.
Okay. My name is Clint McSherry, and I'm here representing the Eno River Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Durham, North Carolina. I'm a member of the stewardship campaign, and this year I'm co-chairing our pledge campaign, which is technically over now, and of course I'm still making some phone calls. We have about 647 members and about 300 pledge units. And I don't have any specific questions now, but I want to share with you that one of my colleagues on the stewardship campaign just attended a service recently at a local Baptist church with 300 members, which has a $900,000 annual budget and 4 ministers. So I'm depressed.
Yeah, it can be done.
How about that?
Yeah.
So did I miss anybody? I think I got everybody that that I saw on my screen. So I think we're good with introductions. So Barry, would you like to?
Okay, I'll go back to screen sharing.
Screen sharing back up, and
I will do that. And if you
jump
all
right
would,
in.
if you all would mute yourselves, I'll in terms of logistics, I will stop periodically and see if there are questions, and you can unmute yourselves and talk then.
And feel free to post questions in the chat as we go as well, and I'll be monitoring the chat.
Right, I would say that as well. Keep, let me do this, there we go. Everybody can see the screen, I take it? All right, well, I'll make a couple quick comments from your check-in. The first is that we have a great mix of people, congregations that, by my count, ranging from somewhere around 80 members to over 800 members. So it's always a challenge to do a webinar like this with such a diverse group, but I will try to provide some information that's applicable to all of you. It clearly won't all be. And then the other thing I noted is that I was probably been to about half of your congregations over the years. For those of you who may not know, I was a longtime member of the Arlington, Virginia church, my wife and I, and Roberta's been the either interim or part-time minister at Fairfax and Frederick and Shenandoah Valley. So we've been to, I can picture a lot of where you are. And thank you for your challenges and questions, and I'll be able to address some of them as we go today, and some of them we'll have to cover in sessions 2 and 3. So let's see. Okay. There we go. Okay, so just a brief level set to make sure everybody knows where we are and that you're all in the right webinar. The webinar series is called The Best Annual Budget Drive Ever, which we hope will come out of this. We know that's a little bit of a grand ambition, but why not think big if we're doing this? As I'm sure you all know, there are 3 sessions to this. The first one is vision, planning, and organizing. Next week, same time, we'll be talking about money. We'll be talking about money. And then the third one is going to be a little bit more practical, more nuts and bolts, thinking about some of the fresh ideas that you asked about today, about using technology, about new ideas, about best practices. And I think, as I said earlier, I think that the timing of all this, our goal was that, and one of the questions or challenges got at this, our goal was that you would all get kind of a jump start on your next year's campaign. Whether you have a fall campaign coming up or a spring campaign, you can be doing some valuable work beginning right now. And I think, and that's what we'll be talking about today, is what can you be doing right now that will set the stage for your campaign. So the agenda for this session today, for session 1, and I'm gonna go through things fairly quickly. You will get the PowerPoints, and I'll hit a lot of high points because we're gonna try to do this in about an hour, and then leave a little bit of time for questions and check out at the end. So I want to talk a little bit about the big picture, and you'll see what I mean by that. But basically, it's the linkage of Unitarian Universalism and stewardship, which I think is an important thing to always keep in mind, and particularly right now as at least one way of keeping things fresh. We invited you in a quick email yesterday or the day before to be thinking about your past years, your most recent annual budget drive, and what went well and what you might do better. So we want to spend a little bit of time talking about that as a way to build toward the future. And then the 3 main sections of what I plan to talk about today are vision, planning, and organizing, much as was written up in the description, and then follow it with however much time we have left for questions and discussion, and check out and wrap up. Okay, so here's the big picture. And in order to get the best annual budget drive, you want to be doing these 3 things that we'll talk about today: vision, planning, and organizing. And you want, in my view, you want to make sure that we're solidly linked to what's important and what's valuable about Unitarian Universalism and about your congregation. So we'll talk about that for a few minutes. So as I said, I really like to keep in mind that Unitarian Universalism, for me, is one of the driving forces in my life. I believe that our faith is world-changing and life-saving and transformational, and that there are tremendous opportunities for Unitarian Universalism in the world, and we are needed now more than ever. I'm sure you're seeing this at your congregations. I've seen it at all the congregations that I've worked with, but there's a huge growth in interest in what we have to offer. Sadly enough, since the election, the good news is that we are seeing lots and lots of new people, and we are being called upon to serve important needs, to be refuge and sanctuary to people who are more vulnerable than ever in the current climate. Talking about immigrants, talking about minorities, people of color, poor people, all kinds of folks are under assault, and our faith has an opportunity to offer protection, offer safety, and also to offer activism and resistance. So I think that thinking about where we are in the world right now is a really important thing, and just keep that in mind as you're planning your best annual budget drive ever. I hope that you were able to do that this year. I'll be curious if that comes out of some of your reflections on this past year's drive. So this, I think, is a little bit obvious, but I think that we sometimes, I'm struck by the comment about the Baptist church with 300 members and a $900,000 budget and 4 ministers. I have a friend, I tell this story often, I have a friend who's a member of an Episcopal church in Washington, D.C., about the same size, and they also have 4 ministers. And I asked him one day, how do you afford all this? And he said, well, we all tithe. And so I think that there's more, we have more capacity, we have more capability. We also could do a much better job of telling our story and telling our congregation's stories. And I think by sharing our stories and sharing what drives us as leaders, and making that infectious and being comfortable doing that, we can increase our generosity and increase the success of our stewardship work, and thereby further our mission. So I'm a passionate believer in this. So let's take a couple of minutes, and I know that you had a chance, I hope you had a chance to reflect a little bit on this past year's drive. Here's a few questions that I hope that you would all be able to at least think about a little bit. What went well? It's always important to keep in mind, keep track of what went well and build on that. What you think could have been better? What was the very best stewardship process you ever participated in, and what made it so? And what are your hopes for next year's drive? And Pat, how would you suggest we do some 5-minute breakout sessions for people to share this? And then what I was hoping is that you could share and talk. One of the things I like with these webinars is to give each of you some airtime, because otherwise it's just me and sometimes Pat talking for an entire hour. So I'm hoping that you have a chance to talk a little bit. And if each of the breakout groups could come away with kind of one thought that you'd like to share with the rest of us, that would be excellent. So what do you suggest, Pat?
So we're going to be breaking into breakout rooms. That means that your screen is going to just shift a little bit, and there's going to be only 4 boxes or 5 boxes in front of you instead of 20. We're going to give you 5 minutes, which means that I will actually, I will hit a button that says the room will close in 60 seconds, and that will be your clue that you need to bring your conversations to a close. So I am going to start the breakout rooms now, and it takes about 10 or 15 seconds for everybody for those rooms to get populated. So I know that some of you are in larger groups, so you may, kind of need to appoint a spokesperson, at least for this question. Okay?
Yeah, and do make sure that every congregation has a chance to talk a little bit and share its experience and its answers to these questions. And I know we're not giving you a lot of time, but make sure you each get a chance to talk.
There should be 3 to 4 people in each room. So
excellent.
That, that means about a minute or so plus transition time. All right.
Excellent.
We'll see you again in 5 minutes. Hi, Winnie. And I know you're not Winnie, but you're York. There you go.
I came back to the main session. I didn't seem to be able to connect with my breakout room.
You couldn't get into your breakout room.
No, I mean, it sent me there, but then nobody could hear me. I didn't hear anybody else. So
all right.
That's okay. I'll just wait till everybody comes back. It's fine.
Okay. Well, it looks like Susan had the same concerns. So, because Susan is back as well. Well, Susan is at Huntington, and they've been having some sound difficulties. So
Okay.
the questions are in the chat box. So if you want to, you can talk.
And I'm just thinking about it on my own. I'm not with anybody else here, so
okay.
it's fine.
Okay. Well, next time we'll get you into a group. I hope that where you can actually have somebody to chat with, and hopefully Susan and the Huntington crew are talking amongst themselves.
Okay, that's fine. No worries.
And Kelly, you're at Mount Kisco?
I'm in Mount Kisco, yes.
Right.
And I think I met you a couple of years ago at one of the
the
Defying Gravity.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, yes. Your name definitely rang a bell with me. If I saw your face, yeah.
I've been doing stewardship for a while, probably longer than I should be.
Yeah. Well, have you had how was your year this year?
Actually, well, we had, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We overall, we kind of were flat with last year, but that was with fewer pledge units, and we had some significant decreases. People who were very big pledgers, and they had sort of changing family situations, decreased their pledge significantly. A couple of people moved away. So in order to be, even just sort of make our budget for this year, a lot of other people had to increase. And we really we got a few new pledges, and we got a lot of people increasing their pledge. So from that perspective, I was really grateful. But, really the bottom line for us comes down to membership. I think we really need to bring in new members. Because people, I think we have a generous congregation. I think they are, for the most part, doing what they can. But one of the challenges that we definitely face is that people felt called to support a lot of other organizations this year. Their charitable giving was stretched in different directions. I think with the current climate. And one of the messages that we tried to emphasize was that, the money that you pledge in this very small congregation is so impactful, as opposed to not to discourage anybody from, Planned Parenthood or ACLU or whatever, but they have millions and millions of supporters, and we have 60. So that $1,000 or $5,000, relatively speaking, is so much more important.
Yeah.
But that's a very difficult message for people who feel.
It's challenging. Yeah. Well, I think our other friends are beginning to come back. The breakout rooms are closing. I think everybody's back, Barry.
I don't see you sharing the screen. I see a Zoom window.
Well, let's see. Where's Barry? Barry's the one who's sharing. Unless you're seeing my screen, but you shouldn't be.
No, I'm just seeing a big white screen from Zoom that says, wasn't that better than what you're used to? Get your own account for free.
Well, that sounds like, hopefully you, are you on the phone or are you on?
No, I'm on computer.
You're on computer. Well, we seem to, I hope that Barry is coming back on because this is his webinar today.
What's everybody else seeing?
I see Brady Bunch screen.
Wow. Yeah, and Barry's video is gone.
Right. Well, I guess it's our break time.
I'm looking at Pat.
Here I am. Carrying the mantle of leadership here, waiting for Barry, my co-leader. All right, I'm gonna guess that Barry has been disconnected in some way. He's not still in a breakout room.
Yeah. Also, his mic doesn't exist. In the list of participants, he has no microphone.
How interesting. Okay. Well, let's see where he might be.
Pat?
Yes, are you back? Are you back?
Well, I'm back on my phone. I don't seem to be able to get back on the computer. Well, I see you on the computer.
Right. Well, you're there. You're there.
Yeah.
Screen, not your picture, but your name.
Yeah. Let me. I don't know what happened. I was in the breakout room, and then I was gone.
Oh, technology. Oh, technology.
Yeah.
All right. So should I share my screen then with the slides? Can you see?
I can see you. Yeah, why don't you do that, and I'll talk from the phone, and I won't really be able to see anybody, I don't think.
All right.
Darn.
This is what happens with
Oh wait, I see you now.
All right.
Okay, good. I see you, and you can hear me over the phone, right?
We can hear you. Yeah.
The sound is okay?
Yes.
All right. So did we get everybody back? Sorry about this.
Yeah, we got everybody back.
Okay. So let's move the slides along to more or less where we were.
Sorry, friends. There we go.
There we go. All right. Well, I would suggest that since we frittered away a fair amount of time with that we skip the sharing of this part of it for now, and just keep in mind what came out of your discussions and your hopes and dreams for next year as we continue. Sorry about that. Okay. So the next, I'm going to, as I said at the beginning, we're going to talk about three things today that I think are all intended to help you kind of get a leg up on the campaign for next year, whether you're having a fall campaign or a spring campaign. So the first is what I'm calling vision, and you can move on to the next slide, Pat. I'm going to talk about vision for both your congregation and vision for your campaign. I think both are a little different. They're related, but let's see the next slide. Okay, so vision, I think, is really important. One of the things that I've observed in the 50 or so congregations that I've worked with is that having a compelling vision about what you're trying to accomplish as a congregation and then for a campaign can be a really important driving force, can be a powerful driving force. And what I mean by a vision, and let's talk first about the congregation and then we'll talk about the campaign. So for the congregation, I see it as a vivid kind of picture, a mental picture of how your congregation will be better able to fulfill its mission this coming year. And you'll see that ties in fairly closely to to your annual campaign. One of the congregations, I believe it was Arlington, that I listened in on in the breakout room, talked about the messaging being really solid this year. And I'd be curious to hear what it was about, but I'm hoping that it was about the mission of the church and how the campaign helps support that. I think an important thing to be able to answer is, how will we be better able to fulfill our mission by raising more money this year? What would we do? What new initiatives could we support with more funds? I don't know, some of you may be familiar with Dan Hotchkiss. Dan is a former Alban Institute consultant. He does a lot of work on governance and stewardship, and I like what he had to say here. This is a paraphrase of his remarks. But he said, you should be able to answer the question, in what new and important ways will our congregation be able to serve people if our campaign is successful? In my experience, if you can answer that question clearly and coherently and cogently, that's a huge step towards a successful campaign. Next slide, Pat. So let's talk about a vision for the campaign. I find in working with congregations that very few congregations, very few stewardship or annual budget drive committees really think about this. And what I'm suggesting that you spend some time thinking about is, what do you want to happen with this particular campaign? And you'll see on the next slide, which I'll get to in a second, that there's a whole lot of things that could be kind of measures of success or goals for your campaign. And some of you talked about this in the breakout rooms and even in your questions. Yeah, and here's a list of some things. You can go back to that for just a second. I always like to suggest that we try to shoot for as close to 100% participation as possible. A lot of congregations struggle with highly inequitable, highly skewed giving. We do quartile analyses and find that a tiny percentage of the congregants provide 50% of the funding. How do we make our giving more equitable? Meeting financial goals, more members giving according to whatever your giving guidelines are, involvement of people. There's all kinds of things that you might want your campaign to achieve. Let's go back to the prior slide for a second. So I think what's important in creating a vision for the campaign is starting by doing some analysis of where are you today. And that's what we do when we come into a congregation. We take a look at where are you in your stewardship? Where are you in your annual giving? We analyze the data over the past several years. We analyze your current campaign and your past few campaigns, what's gone well, what's not gone well, and then set some goals for the campaign as leaders. Not necessarily goals that have to do with, achieving the dollar goals and all that, but what can you build on to make this campaign help you move forward? And I think it's important to see that the campaign, I think it's very important to think of the campaign not as a bit of drudgery to be done, but as a real opportunity to strengthen the community and to build positive energy and spirit. One of the things I continue to be surprised at is that when I work with congregations on capital campaigns, it tends to be pretty easy to create lots of energy and lots of momentum and lots of enthusiasm, and to recognize that a capital campaign is more than a fundraising opportunity. It's an opportunity to really build community. And I find that the congregations that are most successful with annual giving create some of that feeling. Now, to be honest, you can't create all of that feeling because the capital campaign does have the one-time specialness to it. But if you work at it and you take that as an important goal for your campaign, a vision for your campaign, I think you can create some of that feeling each year. And if you as leaders come at it with a positive spirit, and we'll talk as we go forward, we'll talk about how you can plan for things that make it fresh and make it different each year, but also build on some things so there's some continuity. But I think if you as leaders come at it with the idea that this is a positive experience, of course we have to do it because we have to raise the funds, but we also want to do it because we want to take a chance to take a look at our campaign, take a look at our congregations each year and think about what's important, what's our mission, what's our place in the world, and how do we raise the funds to support that. The other thing that I think is really important, and I don't always see this in congregations either, is engaging leadership beyond your stewardship world and beyond your annual budget drive team to help set the vision and also to help build this positive spirit. I do a lot of work with nonprofits, and every nonprofit that I know of, the leadership is involved very heavily in stewardship, in fundraising, and in talking to people about the values of the organization and why you should be why you should be enthusiastic and generous supporters. And to be honest, we seldom do that in our UU congregations. And I think if you as stewardship leaders can make some effort to engage the rest of your leadership team and see it as part of the steward, they all have a stewardship responsibility. And I'm talking about the board, I'm talking about clergy, I'm talking about other professional staff, religious educators, music. Everybody that's in leadership should feel like they're a part of making this campaign as successful as possible, and that it should not be just sort of sloughed off onto a small number of people. And I think you can help bring that out. You can see that as part of your role and as part of the vision for the campaign. The other thing is I think it's really important for all of your leaders to model generosity. And that doesn't mean that they have to be the biggest givers in the congregation, because of course we don't require that only wealthy people can serve on our boards or in leadership positions. But, and you'll see I'll use this term at other times, in my view, everybody should give at a level that they feel proud of. And everybody should give consistent, everybody in leadership should give consistent with the leadership guidelines that the congregation adopts. And I think if our congregations took this more seriously and took a leadership role more seriously, I think we would find that we can be a lot more like the Baptist church that we heard about and the Episcopal church that my friend goes to than many of our Unitarian Universalist churches. All right, let's skip ahead 2 slides now, Pat. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about vision. Again, it's vision for your congregation and vision and mission. People give to vision, people give to mission, and then have a vision for your annual drive. Have a vision every year what you want to accomplish. Do you want to achieve greater equity? Do you want to involve more people in stewardship? Have a vision, have some goals, have some measures that you hope to accomplish, and then see how you can build those into your campaign. All right, now I'm ready to move on to planning. And as I said earlier, if you have questions along the way or comments, if this is not making much sense or if it is making a lot of sense, put something in the chat for the moment and we can stop and ask questions at various times. All right, so let's move on to the second leg of this triumvirate, if that's probably a terrible metaphor, the second piece of this trilogy that we'll talk about today, which is planning. I'm a big fan of planning. At least one of you in your challenges talked about waiting till the very last minute to do planning. For some reason that it doesn't compute with me because I'm kind of a natural planner. It's what I do for much of my work life that's not related to this, beyond what I do for stewardship. But to my mind, doing planning in advance and laying things out, and it gives you so many advantages in terms of being able to involve people, thinking about messaging, and really working on how you're going to implement that vision that we talked about in the first stage. So I'm going to talk about these 4 things for a few minutes. The first is, how do you choose an approach to the campaign? And this is where I think you can bring some freshness every year. Regardless of the approach, you want to be aware of best practices and incorporate those. I know a lot of our congregations are always looking for new ways of doing things, and some best practices are new, but many of the best practices, sadly or not sadly, are the same old, same old. We know how to do a lot of things well. So you want to make sure whatever approach you use, you incorporate the best practices. Figure out a giving guideline and a message, at least at a high level. And you can do this very early. So I'll talk about that. And then creating a high-level plan and schedule with key dates and milestones. So that's what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes. So the first thing is choosing an approach. And I've listed here, this little table has 3 approaches on the left, and key elements of each of those approaches, and then success factors. And I'll talk about this for just a few minutes because I could spend forever on this. There are, and the success factors that are in bold, I think are often really the key things to making each one of these work. So the 3 approaches that I think are most successful in our congregations are personal stewardship conversations, one-on-one, what we used to call the every member canvas. That is still the very best way to engage people. It's the best way to talk to people. It's the most direct ask. It's the best way to raise money. The next two, Commitment Sunday and cottage meetings, I like both of those. Those both have very powerful advantages to them, and they are both they can both be very effective. They require some energy to make them really work well. I'll say that there are other techniques that are used that are all inherently a whole lot less effective than these three. There's mail campaigns, there's email campaigns, there are phone-based campaigns. All of those things are much less effective than these three. What I recommend to congregations in terms of keeping things fresh is that you think about kind of a 5-year cycle and alternate among these three approaches. And if you, in large congregations, sometimes you will wind up doing some email or some mail or some phone campaigns to reach some sizable subset of the population. But as many people as you can reach with one of these three methods, you will do better than any other way to do it. So let me talk just a little bit. I hope everybody knows what I mean by these three things, but just in case you don't, I'll mention them real quickly. As I said, the personal stewardship conversation method, that is where you go out and talk to people one-on-one. It doesn't mean necessarily visiting people in their homes, which is the kind of traditional approach. You can meet with people in your home. You can meet with people in coffee shops. You can meet with people in their homes. It can be quite flexible. Commitment Sunday is where you build up to a single large event, a worship service normally, but it can be an afternoon thing following a worship service. But the idea is to try to get most people to pledge at that one time. So that, of course, requires a fair amount of build-up and communication so people are ready for that. Normally, you would, for all of these techniques, all of these methods, I highly recommend doing a leadership ask in advance of the general ask so that you line up your larger givers and your committed leaders early on in the campaign. That tends to build momentum, and it helps you hone your messaging and engages people, the people who are most involved in the congregation. Cottage meetings are basically what they sound like. They're small group gatherings, often in people's homes, which are nice and comfortable for people. I think what you find with that is that there are a lot of logistical challenges, particularly in large congregations, to get people to sign up and to manage people who make changes at the last minute. So there's more logistical complexities to that than you might think. I want to hit on a couple of the success factors for this, for each one of these. For personal stewardship conversations, of course, the biggest challenge perhaps is recruiting enough visiting stewards to do it well. You really don't want to overburden people with asking them to visit too many folks. 4 it seems to be a good number. I know some people like even 3. I find 4 works pretty well. So if you're a congregation like Arlington with 800 members and maybe 500 or 600 households, you might need 70 or 80 visiting stewards to make this work, which is a pretty big recruiting challenge. Even more important with personal stewardship conversations, I think, is training and support. And really, in doing the training, teach people how to do the ask. One thing that I've observed, people say, well, our personal stewardship conversation work didn't really go that well, and we didn't get big increases in our pledges. And you might not anyway. But what I find is that many of the visiting stewards that you train are not comfortable doing a direct ask. And so you really want to make sure that you know how you want people to ask, and you train them to do it, and you give them materials that let them do it. And I'll move on to Commitment Sunday now. The big plus of that is that you've got everybody in a room all at once, and everyone can hear the same message at once. And when it's done well, you have a professional ask. So you have somebody who really knows how to ask people pretty directly for whatever it is that your giving guideline. I'll talk about giving guidelines in a second. But whatever it is your giving ask is, you have someone who's really committed to doing it. If you can inject that same level of asking in the other approaches, cottage meetings or personal stewardship conversations, you can see tremendous results. The other thing, we had a question in the chat about how you might organize cottage meetings, whether they're organized in different ways. I see congregations do it all over the place. You can have cottage meetings that are organized around age cohorts or around tenure cohorts. You can have geographic cohorts. You can have just by availability of times. Many congregations these days use online signups for these things. And you put up a whole bunch of, we have 20 meetings. Please sign up for one that's convenient for you, and you just let the chips fall where they may. I think you can make a small group meeting work in almost any configuration. Some people like to be with people they know. Some people like to meet new people. The same is true for pairing up visiting stewards with people to go visit. Let's move on to the next slide. So best practices. I've kind of already talked about some of this, but I'll say a couple of things. Of course, the most important thing is having a compelling case, as I said earlier, so people know if we raise more money, how will we be better able to support our vision and mission? That's really the key thing. Giving people clear guidance. We Unitarian Universalists have not been very good at giving guidance to our members about how much to pledge. The more clarity you can give, and also the more consistency. I see in many congregations that every year they kind of reinvent the giving message. One year it might be 5% of income. One year it might be increased by 10% over last year, or 3%. One year it might be, if you're not giving $1,500, get up to that level. If you're at that level, give to some other level. I find that can be confusing. So I recommend that you pick a giving guide. You'll see in a second I'm going to promote the UUA's giving guide. I like that for a lot of reasons, but I recommend that you pick a giving guide and stick with it for at least a few years so people get it and people can think of it as a multi-year approach to getting on the guide and to being consistent with it. I already talked a little bit about doing a personal and direct ask. We know that if you want people to do anything, the best thing to do is to ask them personally and directly, and to make the ask linked very directly to something about them. The other thing I'll mention on this is ample time to plan followed by rapid execution. I find the campaigns that go really well get done fast, and the advantages of all three of the techniques that I've talked about, the stewardship conversations, the cottage meetings, and the commitment Sunday, they all can be done in a very compressed period of time. I like 3 weeks, no more than that, for the length of the time allowed for cottage meetings or for stewardship conversations. You don't want your campaign to drag on, or you lose momentum, you lose interest, and everything dissipates. And it's frustrating for you as the leaders. I put Beyond Fundraising up here. That's the Wayne Clark book that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Even though it's now 10 years old, it's still the best thing that there is as far as our UU Bible for stewardship. There are some new things. There are some online things. Pat mentioned the Wisdom Path. I think that's really a valuable resource. But in terms of the nuts and bolts of running a campaign, you can't beat Beyond Fundraising. All right, let's move on, Pat. So giving guidelines. I put down up here, I put up on this slide some sort of elements of effective guidance. I think first, you want it to be clear. You want it to promote equity in giving and also universality. So I think some of the guidelines that I see, I'll talk a little bit about those two things. And you also want to promote generosity. So you want people to think about stretching. But you also want to make sure that your guide appeals to everyone in the congregation, from the most well-to-do people to the people who are really struggling financially. And so I think it's important that your guideline be progressive, that it reflect that we recognize that as people have more capacity, they can be expected to give more. One of the things that I really like about the UUA guide is that it does meet all those criteria. It promotes equity in giving. It reflects the idea that people have varying capacities. And it's also been honed by the wisdom of many congregations over the years. I find that some of the guidance that we give in our congregations are hard for some people to meet. So when a congregation says we hope everyone can give 5% of their income, I think that can be very hard for people, particularly at the lower income levels. But even sometimes people who can be struggling at higher levels if they have extraordinary health costs or other issues that the UUA guide takes into account. So I recommend that you think about your guidance carefully and think about the message that goes with it. And I urge you really to take a look at the UUA guide if you haven't used it. I have it I'm not going to go through it here because we can spend forever on it, but there's some slides in the back that I've called an appendix that you will get about the guide and some summary of it. Now let's move on to the next bit. The next slide. So I do recommend that early on you come up with a high-level schedule for your campaign so that you can figure out where everything fits. This may seem obvious, but I see many congregations don't exactly do this. You want to work backwards from your budget cycle. When do you need to present a budget to the board and to the congregation? When do you need the results of your budget drive, or at least enough of the results so that you can project income for the following year? And then from that, when do you want to have your kickoff Sunday? When do you want to have a leadership event if you're doing that? When do you want to have a celebration marking the end of the campaign? I think it's really important to mark the end of the campaign and let people know what we've accomplished, where we are, what yet remains to be done. I think, and having that be a celebration and a thank you and an expression of gratitude. I think you want to build that into your plans right from the beginning. It's also really important, a key element of the campaign, in fact, most of the campaign, if you think about it, is really about communication. So I think as you start out, you want to think about a high-level communication plan and schedule, and then you'll see when we talk more about the nuts and bolts, a much more detailed communication plan and schedule. And I think, keep in mind that there's two elements for communication. There's two things you're trying to accomplish. The first is you're trying to encourage people to participate. So if you're doing one-on-one visits, you want to communicate to people, why are you doing that? Why are we doing one-on-one visits? What do we hope to accomplish? Why should everyone participate? How will it be comfortable for people to participate? You want to have that message. The same for cottage meetings or Commitment Sunday. And then you want to have messaging that encourages generosity. So that's the compelling case. What will we do with more funds? And you don't want to mix those two. I mean, you can mix those two, but you want to be very intentional about when you're going to communicate each of these things and what medium you're going to use for doing that. Next slide. All right, so that's what I was going to say about planning. And as I said at the beginning, I'm going to kind of race through this. So maybe I'll pause here for a second. We have almost 25 minutes left. Questions about the planning area? I saw one question about role of clergy. I'll talk a little bit about that while you're thinking of other questions that you can enter into the chat. I think that clergy plays a really important role as a leader in stewardship. When I first started doing this work, even 10 years ago, there was quite a fair amount of inconsistency or ambivalence about how much clergy should be involved in stewardship, how much they should know about giving levels in the congregation and all that. I've seen a sea change in that over these last 10 years. Almost all of the ministers that I go visit with now, almost all the congregations I visit with, the ministers are very actively involved in stewardship. I think that they are an important part of the leadership team, the leadership that I spoke about before. I know that my wife and many of the other ministers that I talk to do some visits, some stewardship visits, strategically chosen, both for annual campaigns and for capital campaigns. If ministers are comfortable with that, that's great. Ministers can also have tremendous power from the pulpit to convey the messaging both about why you should participate in the campaign and also about the compelling case. Ministers can help tremendously with recruiting. I'm going to talk a fair amount about recruiting for these last few minutes. Ministers can be a huge help. I find that in many congregations, when a minister asks somebody to do something, they're more likely to do it maybe than when other people do. So again, think about using your minister strategically or involving your minister strategically. The same for the board chair. I know I was the board chair at Arlington in Virginia, a large church, and I found that when my role was used strategically, it can have a huge impact going to meet with people, again, recruiting people. The ministers and the board chairs and other leaders can make it. The music director can have a huge impact on your stewardship work. So I urge you to think about that in all phases of this early planning. All right, let me, questions that I should answer right now, Pat, or should we wait till the end? You're muted,
There
I
is
think.
one that might be a quick question. How much of your budget should you spend on stewardship?
That's a very good question, and to be honest, I don't really know that there's a good answer for that. It depends a little bit on what you're doing. I know for capital campaigns, it's easier to think about the budget. I know for a capital campaign, congregations typically spend anywhere from 2 to 5% of the total that you wind up raising between consulting help and other things that you need to do, events and publications and all kinds of fairly major expenses. For annual campaigns, I don't know. To be honest, I don't really know what the average budget might be. I know what people spend money on is they spend money on events, they spend money on publications and publicity, they spend money on consulting. There's less money spent on publications these days. Used to be to get a nice brochure, you had to go out and spend some money on it. Now most congregations produce things in-house and they do online things in-house. So it's mostly events and consulting. I'll see if I can find some information on that between now and when we next get back together. Oh, I see from Arlington, 0.5% of overall budget for stewardship. So that's your overall congregation's budget rather than the budgets. Well, be similar, I suppose, or close to what your annual giving campaign raises as well. So 0.5% for the annual drive. I know in many congregations there's a budget of say $2,000 or $5,000, but I know most of this anecdotally. All right, let's move on and take the next maybe 10 or 15 minutes and talk about organizing, which is the last part of what I think you need to do in this early stage to get ready for the campaign. I'm going to talk about getting a leadership team in place, recruiting, messaging, and campaign execution. And by that, I mean getting ready for the execution part of the campaign. All right, next slide. All right, so organizing the leadership team. And this is one where you're going to have to tailor this to the size of your congregation. There's quite a bit of material about leadership teams and organizing them in the Beyond Fundraising book. I won't talk in great detail about this, but you want to scale your leadership team to the size of the congregation. Obviously, in a congregation of 50 or 80 people, as are some that I've worked with and some on our call, you're not likely to have 10 or 12 people on the leadership team. You might have 3 or 4 people, and they'll be doing multiple roles. I've laid out some of the key roles that you want to make sure that you have here. I skipped over, you definitely want to have a charter for your team. You want to make clear what the responsibilities are, whether it's an ongoing team or it's just going to be a task force for this 1 year's campaign. A lot of congregations have an ongoing stewardship, year-round long-range stewardship committee, and then an annual budget drive task force is a nice way to do that. But however you do it, I think each year you want to kind of reinvent your leadership team. And the item that I have that's in bold here is you want to make sure that your leadership team is solidly behind the approach that you've chosen for the campaign. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with a congregation where the board or the leadership has decided they want to do cottage meetings or one-on-one visits, and they recruit a leadership team who's lukewarm about that. So don't do that. That's really shooting yourself in the foot. And you can do this in a couple of different ways. You can recruit a leadership team and have the leadership team choose an approach, or you can choose an approach and choose a leadership team that matches the approach. But make sure you do that. And then you also, as you can see here, you want to define and communicate the roles and expectations for other leaders in the congregation, as I talked a little bit earlier. Get everybody, make sure, again, this is something you can think about early on. Think about it now. What role do you want folks to play, and how will you convince them to play that role? The more people that you can get involved, the more successful your campaign will be. That's kind of a general principle about all of this. So the more leaders can be involved and the more people you can recruit, the better everything will be. So let's talk about recruiting. One of your questions was, how do you do recruiting? So I think a couple things that I've learned is the first is to have job descriptions about what you want done, so that you recruit people who are doing this with the full knowledge of what's expected of them, what the time commitment is, what the skill commitment is. The fastest way to have frustration is to recruit someone who doesn't really understand what you want them to do. Also, I think it's really important to be flexible and creative and open. And I'll talk a little bit about this, but I think if you are creative and open and flexible and willing to tailor the jobs to the people that you can find, that you can get lots more people to do more things, and you won't be off on your own trying to do everything. And so, for example, and I think I have another slide about this, but I'll talk about it here. In every congregation, I know that we have people who love to plan parties. And many of those party planners are not likely to be on your stewardship team. They're not likely to be money people, but they will plan parties if you ask them to. And good stewardship campaigns, good annual budget drives have some parties. Commitment Sunday is usually a grand party. Cottage meetings are a whole bunch of mini parties. If you do a one-on-one drive, you're likely to have a kickoff Sunday with a party, a leadership event with a party, and so on. So get party people to do this work. They don't have to come to any meetings. They can just plan the parties. You give them a little bit of guidance and let them run with this. The same is true for communicating electronically. You have no doubt young people in your congregations who can do wonderful things with Facebook and Instagram and technologies that I don't even vaguely understand, text messaging, email, websites. Get other people to do that stuff. They don't have to come to any meetings. They can work with you by phone and electronically. They don't have to join any committees. You can sign them up to do specific tasks. And before you know it, you can have 20 people working on this campaign who would not otherwise be involved. That's a great way to get people involved, get people learning about generosity, and injecting lots more energy and enthusiasm and keeping the campaigns fresh. The way to do recruiting is the same way as it is to get people to be generous. It's to ask directly and personally, to understand something about them, to be strategic. Part of the job right now is to think about what kind of people you want to recruit, who should recruit the various people, who should go talk to each person. Think about this really tactically and strategically. Get the minister involved, get others involved. This is a big job, and you can make a huge impact with this. I've already talked about most of this, but you can reach out to brand new members. I guarantee you can get new members to work on things like the technology, the parties. Database is a task you can get some new people to work on, reporting, publications, all kinds of things. If you open your minds and let yourself think a little bit, you can have lots of people working on these campaigns. Messaging is really, really critical. Already talked about a lot of this. I think you want to make sure that you're consistent in your messaging and that your messaging builds on itself. What I find in many congregations is there's not enough communication and there's not enough, not spread over a long period of time. People don't read very much these days. They don't listen very well. They're distracted by many things. They have inboxes with 10,000 messages. I speak from experience with this. At least every couple of weeks, my wife says to me, and I quote, "Don't you read the newsletter?" And I'm pretty committed to this stuff. So you have to say the same things over and over and over again. You have to share stories and make them personal. You also have to make sure that you manage the communication. I can't tell you how many congregations do testimonials where they get people sharing stories, and the stories really don't have very much to do with the current campaign or with the asking for generosity. So tell people what you want when you want them to share their stories. Give people some guidance and ask them to tell you in advance what they're going to say. Also, recognize that we, as Unitarian Universalist congregations, are in a unique position. I talked earlier about Unitarian Universalism and its place in the world. Recognize that we are a religious community. We are a spiritual community. We are a faith-based community. There's a spiritual grounding for stewardship. We're all in covenant with one another. The annual budget drive, somebody asked about fundraising. The annual budget drive in most of our congregations raises at least 80 or 85% of the funds that we need. It's the most stable and the most predictable source of funds. It's the funds that your leaders need to think about budgets for next year. So let people know that. Make sure that people understand that, and that giving to that cause is a sacred spiritual exercise. And I think in many of our congregations, we don't talk about that enough. All right, next slide. So once again, we want to think about this communication plan. I mentioned earlier in the planning stage, you want a high-level plan. As you're into organizing, you want a very detailed plan. I like to have one person on the team be kind of the communication czar, if that's a good word, to put together a pretty detailed plan. That doesn't mean that that person does all the communicating or writes everything or creates all the brochures. In fact, pretty much the opposite. That person is an orchestrator, and it could be a couple of people, particularly in a big congregation, but communication is another way that you can involve lots of people. You can get lots of people talking to each other. You can get lots of people talking on Sunday mornings. You can communicate through existing committees. You can go talk to the choir, go talk to the religious education families, involve the staff, involve the leaders, involve everybody. The other thing, and I didn't put it on this slide, but I forgot, I meant to, is don't underestimate the value of informal communication. Talk to each other at coffee hour. Ask the board members to talk to other people at coffee hour. Talk to people when you go on marches and you're walking down. We were on the March for Science the other day. Probably several of you were too. Talk to each other about science and our congregations and what that means for next year's annual budget drive. Talk to people. The more you talk to people, the more people will get it. All right, the next slide. So the last piece I think I want to talk about in terms of organizing and getting organized as early as possible is getting ready to do campaign execution. And I think this is really important. And you want to have people on your team who are very well organized and who look like they're organized. And you want the campaign to look like it's a professionally run campaign. The more seriously you run this, the more it looks like you're prepared and you know what you're doing, the more responsive other people will be. One of the things I tell people in my visiting steward training is that visiting stewards or the presenters at cottage meetings or the presenter on Commitment Sunday should be organized and should be prepared and should look like they're prepared and like they know what they're doing. The more you know what you're doing, the more the people you're talking to will be able to respond and be comfortable. And so you see I bolded the words a campaign here. You want to recognize that you are running a campaign and that that's a serious undertaking. You're involving lots of people, lots of moving parts. You want to know when everything has to be done so that nothing, so I talk about it's almost like having a critical path here, like you're building a building. You don't want the bricklayers to show up before the bricks arrive. So when your visiting stewards are ready to go out or your cottage meeting people are ready to go out, you want to make sure that all their material is in place. You want to make sure that communication has been done in advance. You want to make sure that the sign-ups are done. Everything has to be done in the right order and has to be done very, very professionally, very high quality. You don't want to give short shrift to this organized execution part of this. Database and analysis and monitoring progress along the way is really important. One of the things I talked earlier about wanting to make sure that you get the campaign done quickly. One of the ways to do that is to know how progress is happening and to nag people if you have to get them moving. So I like on a visiting steward campaign, I like every visiting steward to report at least once a week, report progress. If you don't hear from that visiting steward, assume they're not doing anything and you should get in touch with them. That keeps momentum going, keeps things building, keeps progress happening. If you wait until the end and then you say, well, gee, half of our visiting stewards didn't do anything, you're going to be very frustrated. So organize this like a campaign. And then the last point on this is to show appreciation often. Thank people, thank the congregation every Sunday as it's going on. Think about how you're going to report to the congregation along the way. What messaging are you going to do? What images are you going to do to show progress and all of that? All right, so that's what I have to say about the three parts of this. Just a reminder here, focus on Unitarian Universalism and your congregation now more than ever. I think we're going to be seeing more and more people, as I said. Vision and mission is important. Compelling case and effective ask, planning and recruiting, and make sure that you are well organized for a rapid campaign, well organized, well planned, so that you can carry out a 3-week campaign with as little mop up and wrap up as possible. So with that, questions, comments? Here's some resources. I think I've already talked about, I talked about beyond fundraising. Visit us, Stewardship for Us, on the web. Also, I didn't put this up here. I meant to. The Central East region has quite a good array of resources available to you. And I do encourage you to check out the Wisdom Path as well. Questions that someone asking a question? We have about 5 minutes left.
Can you show the stewardship focus, the resources again, that slide?
Sure. I think we can manage that.
We can share again. We're also going to be sending out the PowerPoint to everybody right after the class. I'll put that in an email to everybody who's registered.
Okay.
And we are also recording this video. So it takes us a couple days to process it and turn it into a YouTube video, but we'll send out a link to the video as well. So, you know, if I know Barry moved really quickly along, and so if you want to take a little bit more time to think about some of the great concepts that he presented, you'll have that opportunity as well.
Okay, good.
And you can, I see that I'm back on video. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
Yep, I don't know how that happened and didn't happen, but I now see a button where I can push to activate the camera yet again, which didn't appear most of the time. But anyway, you can also send us some questions. I hope that most or all of you will show up for the next 2 sessions as well. But send us some questions or comments for our planning for the next sessions as well. We'll be happy to get those via email. And with that, should we do a quick checkout? Should we go around and do it? We have 3 minutes left.
We have 3
minutes
left.
Speaks for about, what, did you have something in mind for a checkout, Pat?
You know, I was just thinking that we would invite everybody to just, you know, is there something that you heard tonight that got you really excited, that you know, or that you have more questions about, just to sort of lay that out for us. We can do that sort of popcorn. We can do that in the chat box. That's probably the quickest way to do that. So let's, a couple of folks. Okay. What did you hear today that's like, oh my goodness, I'm so excited. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to telling my team in June, we're building a campaign plan for 12 months.
Yay.
And being serious about that.
Excellent.
This is Bill. I'm excited about expanding the effort beyond the stewardship team and limiting the campaign to 3 weeks. That sounds great.
I appreciate Clint's feedback about the breakout rooms, and we'll work on that. We've used the breakout room successfully in lots of other classes, so I'm not quite sure what happened tonight, but we'll hope that that works better next time. Tracy's excited about the links and the books, and we'll do some more resources next time. I'll be doing most of the talking next time. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of the cultural change that has to take place and some of the educational processes that you might want to engage in to help get your congregation talking about money in a more positive and less anxious way.
Yes, and I have some other resources. I'm sure Pat does as well, so we can share some other resources with you more than beyond what we have in the PowerPoints today.
Great. Well, it's 8:29, and I'm just going to share a couple of words here of good night. So these are the words of John Morgan. He was a minister, he's retired now, but he served in our Joseph Priestley district. In the end, it won't matter how much we have, but how generously we have given. It won't matter how much we know, but rather how well we live. And it won't matter how much we believe, but how deeply we love. So thank you all for being with us. And thank you all for your patience as we work through some of the technology glitches.
Yes, I was going to say that too. Thank you so much for participating. I'm really pleased to see so many of you, and I'm glad to hear from some of you at least that this was helpful. And again, I echo Pat's thanks for your patience. I'm sorry I got bumped off there. Fortunately, we didn't fritter away too much time with that little glitch. And most of you were able to be seen and heard, which is always nice. So thank you.
And technology-wise, this was a pretty big success. These are small glitches you had.
Very true.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Well, hopefully we'll see you next time. Take care.